the evening of May 31st, 2021, a 9-year-old boy sat in front of a phone camera, smiling. He was excited. In his hands was something he had been eager to show off all day, a brand new Chelsea football shirt. As family members watched through a FaceTime call, he proudly held it up to the camera. He laughed, he smiled. To everyone watching, it seemed like an ordinary family moment, a happy child enjoying a normal evening. Nothing appeared unusual, nothing appeared wrong. But what nobody knew was that these would become some of the final images anyone would ever have of him alive. Within hours, this little boy and his mother would be dead. The person responsible wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a burglar. He wasn't someone who had randomly targeted the family. He was someone who already knew them, someone who had once been part of their lives. And as investigators would later uncover, the events of that night may have begun long before anyone realized the danger that was building. This is the story of Bethany Vincent and Darren Henson, a story of obsession, control, fear, and a tragedy that left an entire community searching for answers. To understand what happened that night, it's important to first understand the people at the center of this case, because before they became headlines, they were simply a mother and son trying to live their lives.
Every case leaves behind a story. Some truths stay buried. Some mysteries refuse to fade. The evidence grows cold, but the questions remain. Every crime leaves a witness.
Bethany Vincent was 26 years old. Friends and relatives described her as devoted to her children. Like many young mothers, much of her life revolved around providing for them, caring for them, and making sure they were safe. Those who knew her remembered someone who loved deeply and worked hard to create a stable future for her family. She wasn't famous. She wasn't seeking attention. She was simply a mother doing her best. Her son, Darren Henson, known affectionately as DJ, was 9 years old. People who knew him described a cheerful, energetic boy who loved football and enjoyed spending time with family. He had the kind of excitement and curiosity that many children his age possess. The future stretched out in front of him. School years still to come. Birthdays, Christmases, dreams yet to be discovered. His entire life was ahead of him. Looking back now, that's one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this case. The overwhelming sense of potential that was stolen. But while Bethany focused on raising her children and moving forward with her life, there was someone else who seemed unable to move forward at all. A man named Daniel Boulton. At one point, Boulton had been involved in a relationship with Bethany. Like many relationships, it eventually came to an end. For most people, breakups are painful but manageable. Time passes. People heal. Life moves forward. But according to evidence later presented in court, Daniel Boulton appeared unwilling to accept that reality. As months passed, concerns about his behavior began to grow. What had once been a relationship appeared to be transforming into something far more troubling. And although nobody could yet see the full picture, warning signs were beginning to emerge. One of the most difficult things about cases like this is that hindsight often makes danger appear obvious. After a tragedy, people look back and identify all the moments that seem significant, all the incidents that now appear connected. But when events are unfolding in real time, things are rarely so clear. Small concerns are often dismissed. Uncomfortable situations are rationalized. People hope problems will improve. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't. And in this case, investigators would later conclude that Daniel Boulton's fixation on Bethany had continued long after their relationship ended. The breakup may have closed one chapter, but for him, it did not bring closure. Instead, evidence suggested his resentment was growing. And when obsession is left unchecked, it doesn't stay still. It festers, it builds, until something breaks. At first glance, Daniel Boulton might not have appeared different from countless other former partners struggling to accept the end of a relationship. But beneath the surface, something much darker seemed to be developing. As months passed, Bethany attempted to move forward with her life. She focused on her children. She focused on her future. Yet the shadow of her former relationship remained. And as investigators would later discover, Daniel Boulton was spending increasing amounts of time thinking about her. What nobody knew was how far that fixation would eventually take him. Then came the final days before the murders. Days that would later become critical to understanding the case.
In late May of 2021, Daniel Boulton was staying in Skegness, a coastal town in Lincolnshire. Bethany was living roughly 28 miles away in Louth. For most people, 28 miles is an inconvenient journey, a distance requiring planning, transportation, time. But prosecutors would later argue that Boulton was determined, and determination can eliminate obstacles that would stop most people. At some point before the attack, he began traveling toward Louth. The journey would eventually become one of the most disturbing details revealed during the investigation. Because he wasn't simply heading in Bethany's direction, he was making a deliberate journey toward her home, toward the place where she felt safest, toward the place where her children lived. As he traveled, life continued normally for everyone else. Families gathered during the bank holiday, friends spoke on the phone, children played outside. People planned the week ahead. Nothing about the day suggested that one of Lincolnshire's most shocking crimes was only hours away. Meanwhile, inside Bethany's home, the atmosphere appeared ordinary. DJ was enjoying time with family, the baby was safe at home, and Bethany was spending another evening caring for the people she loved most. The final FaceTime call took place that evening. Family members would later remember every detail, not because they knew it would be important, but because tragedy has a way of transforming ordinary memories into precious ones. DJ proudly showed off his Chelsea shirt. He smiled into the camera. He appeared happy, healthy, completely unaware of the danger moving steadily closer. Nobody on that call could have imagined what would happen next. Nobody knew that while they were sharing laughs and conversation, Daniel Boulton was nearing the end of his journey, a journey that prosecutors would later describe as deliberate and purposeful, a journey that was bringing him directly to Bethany's door. And before the night was over, everything would change. The family would lose a daughter, a child would lose his life, a community would be left in shock, and police would begin a manhunt that would capture national attention. But first, the door opened, and the nightmare began. What happened inside that house would never be fully witnessed by anyone else. There were no cameras recording events, no independent witnesses inside the property, only the evidence left behind. Evidence that investigators would later use to reconstruct the final moments. What is known is that violence erupted inside the family home. A place that should have been a refuge suddenly became the scene of unimaginable tragedy. Bethany Vincent was attacked. So was her 9-year-old son, Darren. The attack was swift, brutal, and devastating. Within a very short period of time, 2 lives had been taken, a young mother and her child. Meanwhile, Bethany's baby survived the incident physically unharmed. It is one of the few pieces of relief in an otherwise heartbreaking story. But at that moment, nobody outside the house knew what had happened. Neighbors were unaware. Family members had no idea that the people they had spoken to earlier were gone. Life continued normally outside. Inside, however, everything had changed. When emergency services were eventually alerted and arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a devastating reality. Bethany Vincent had suffered fatal injuries. 9-year-old Darren Henson had also suffered fatal injuries. For the officers and paramedics who entered the property, it was immediately clear that this was no ordinary investigation. This was the killing of a mother and her son inside their own home. Cases involving children are among the most emotionally difficult investigations law enforcement can face. And from the very beginning,
Detectives understood the seriousness of what they were dealing with. The crime scene was secured. Specialist investigators were called in. Evidence collection began almost immediately. Every detail mattered. Every minute mattered. And one question quickly became the focus of the investigation. Where was Daniel Boulton? As detectives worked through the evidence, attention rapidly turned toward Bethany's former partner. His connection to the family immediately drew scrutiny. The more investigators examined the circumstances surrounding the case, the more significant that connection appeared. Soon, police publicly identified Boulton as the prime suspect. But there was a problem. He was gone. Somewhere in Lincolnshire, a man suspected of murdering a mother and child was on the run, and nobody knew where he was. News spread quickly. Residents woke up to alarming headlines. Social media filled with discussions about the case. Many people were stunned. Louth was not a place accustomed to crimes of this magnitude. The murders shocked the community. Flowers began appearing near the scene. Messages of sympathy spread online. People who had never met Bethany or DJ found themselves affected by the story, partly because of the victims, partly because of the circumstances, and partly because of the knowledge that the suspect had not yet been caught. As the manhunt intensified, police issued appeals to the public. Officers worked around the clock. Every lead was pursued, every potential sighting investigated. Then came a moment that sharpened everything. On June 1st, less than 24 hours after the murders, an off-duty police officer encountered Daniel Boulton near Hubbard's Hills, a well-known beauty spot close to Louth. It seemed, for a brief moment, like it might be over. It wasn't. The officer attempted to intervene. A confrontation followed. The officer was injured, and Boulton disappeared again. For investigators, it was a crushing setback, but it also confirmed something important. He was still nearby, still moving, and still dangerous. The search intensified further. Additional resources were deployed. Armed officers joined the operation. Communities remained on alert. Then finally, the breakthrough arrived. Police located Daniel Boulton at a farm near Louth. Armed officers moved in. This time, there would be no escape. The manhunt that had gripped the region was over. Boulton was arrested and taken into custody. For investigators, it marked the end of one phase of the case. For Bethany and DJ's loved ones, however, the pain was only beginning. An arrest could not undo what had happened. It could not bring back a daughter. It could not bring back a grandson. It could not erase the images and memories that now haunted everyone connected to the tragedy. But it did mean one thing. The search for justice could finally begin. With Daniel Boulton in custody, investigators turned their full attention to building the case. A double murder investigation requires answers, not assumptions, not rumors. Answers supported by evidence. Detectives reconstructed Boulton's movements in the days leading up to the attack. The journey from Skegness to Louth became a major focus, not simply because of the distance, but because of what it revealed about intention. According to prosecutors, this was not a chance encounter, not an impulsive meeting that suddenly escalated. The evidence pointed to a man who had made a deliberate decision, traveled a deliberate distance, and arrived at a deliberate destination. That distinction would become central to everything that followed. As investigators continued their work, Bethany and Darren's loved ones were left trying to cope with an unimaginable loss. Funerals were arranged. Tributes continued to appear across Lincolnshire. Flowers accumulated near the scene. Messages from strangers arrived from around the country. Many people felt deeply affected by the story, perhaps because the victims felt so familiar. A young mother devoted to her children, a little boy who loved football, the kind of family people could easily picture living next door. But while the public mourned, prosecutors were preparing for trial. And when that trial eventually began, it would force a courtroom to sit with details that were both heartbreaking and deeply disturbing. Inside the courtroom, jurors heard the full picture of the relationship between Bethany and Daniel Boulton. They heard about the months that followed the breakup, the fixation, the growing resentment, the journey on May 31st, and the events that unfolded when that journey ended. For Bethany's family, every day of testimony was another layer of grief. They had already lived the worst moment of their lives. Now they were being asked to sit and hear it reconstructed, piece by piece,
in a room full of strangers. Daniel Boulton admitted responsibility for the deaths. His legal team did not dispute that he had caused them. Instead, they argued that mental health issues had significantly diminished his responsibility, that what happened should be treated not as murder, but as something lesser. The jury disagreed. After hearing the full weight of the evidence, the planning, the distance traveled, the deliberate nature of his actions, they returned a verdict of guilty on both counts. Guilty of the murder of Bethany Vincent, guilty of the murder of Darren Henson. For Bethany's loved ones, it was not a moment of celebration. It never is. But it was a moment of acknowledgement. A court had looked at everything and reached its conclusion. These lives mattered. This was not excused. At sentencing, the judge reflected on the full gravity of what had been taken. Not just 2 lives, but a future. A child who would never see another Christmas morning. A mother who would never watch her children grow up. A family permanently fractured by a single night. Daniel Boulton was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years before any consideration of parole. One of the most severe sentences available under English law, a reflection of what the court believed the crime deserved. Yet justice and healing remain entirely separate things. The sentence closed a legal chapter. It could not close the emotional one. It could not restore what was taken. It could not answer the question that haunts cases like this most deeply. Could it have been prevented? As the proceedings concluded, attention increasingly turned toward that question, toward broader conversations about domestic abuse, about coercive and controlling behavior, about what obsession looks like before it becomes violence. Many experts note that by the time physical harm occurs, the warning signs have often existed for months, sometimes years. The control, the fear, the refusal to accept an ending. Those patterns don't appear overnight, and recognizing them earlier has the potential to change outcomes. That conversation is uncomfortable, but it is necessary, because every lesson learned from a tragedy like this carries the possibility of protecting someone else. Today, years after the murders, Bethany Vincent and Darren Henson continue to be remembered, not because of the violence that ended their lives, but because of who they were, a mother, a son, 2 people deeply loved by those around them. And perhaps the most powerful way to remember them is through a moment that occurred before any of it, a moment completely untouched by the events that followed, the FaceTime call, a smiling 9-year-old boy proudly showing off a Chelsea football shirt, laughing, grinning into the camera, enjoying what he believed was just another ordinary day. When family members think back on that memory now, it undoubtedly carries a different meaning. What once seemed routine became precious. What once seemed ordinary became unforgettable, because none of them knew it would be one of their final moments together. In many ways, that image captures the true tragedy of this case. Not the headlines, not the courtroom, not even the manhunt, but the ordinary life that was interrupted, the future that disappeared, the birthdays that would never come, the football matches never watched, the conversations never had, the memories never made. Bethany Vincent was 26 years old. Darren Henson was 9. Their lives mattered. Their stories mattered. And although the events of May 31st, 2021 can never be undone, their memory continues through the people who loved them. Long after the court case ended, long after the headlines faded, and long after the man responsible was sent to prison. Because while tragedies are often remembered for how lives ended, the people at the center of those stories deserve to be remembered for how they lived. And that is how Bethany Vincent and Darren Henson should be remembered. Not as victims in a headline, but as a mother and son whose lives touched countless others, and whose loss will never be forgotten. If this case stayed with you, that reaction matters. It means you saw Bethany and DJ as people, not just a story. At Cold Witness, that's exactly the point. We go beyond the headlines, into the lives, the moments, and the silence that follows. If that's the kind of storytelling you want more of, subscribe, because the next case will take you just as deep.